her reputation, her safety, and her very heart. A lone school teacher gambled it all on the stranger who collapsed on her floor during a blizzard in 1888 Montana. His name was Jasper Kane, a cowboy with a bullet in his side and secrets in his eyes. As she fought to save his life, the town she served turned against her, convinced she was harboring a devil. A relentless bounty hunter was closing in, determined to prove them right. She had to decide, was the man in her care an innocent victim or a cold-blooded killer? The answer would determine if they ended the winter sharing one last name or one lonely grave. The wind in Redemption Gap, Montana territory had a voice of its own. In the autumn of 1888, it howled with the fury of 1,000 scorned ghosts, ripping at the seams of the small clapboard buildings, huddled together as if for warmth against the vast, indifferent wilderness. It was a sound Rosa Jean Evans had come to know intimately, a constant companion in the one-room schoolhouse that doubled as her home. At 26, she was the town's steadfast, kind-hearted teacher, a woman whose past was as neatly tucked away as the stray hairs in her sensible brown bun. She had sought refuge in the isolation of Redemption Gap, a place where questions were considered poor manners and a person's history was their own to keep. On this particular evening, the sky was the color of a fresh bruise, and the first icy needles of a premature blizzard were beginning to sting the air. Inside the potbelly stove glowed a cheerful cherry red, its warmth a fragile shield against the encroaching cold. Rosa was grading penmanship, her red pencil scratching a delicate rhythm against the rough paper when a frantic pounding on her door shattered the peace. It wasn't the polite rap of a parent or the mischievous tap of a student. This was a desperate, primal drumming, a sound of pure panic. Her heart leaped into her throat. Decent folk didn't come calling in a storm like this, not after dark. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from beside the stove, its familiar weight a small comfort, and crept toward the door. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. A man's voice, rough and strained, cut through the wind. "Please, need help. He's bleeding bad." Slowly wrestling with the bolt that had swollen in the damp, Rosa pulled the heavy door inward. The wind tore it from her grasp, slamming it back against the interior wall. A figure stumbled in, half carrying, half dragging another man, who collapsed onto the rough-hewn floorboards like a sack of grain. The first man was stout, his face ruddy and weathered. Rosa recognized him as Jebediah Smith, a gruff trapper who lived miles out of town and only appeared a few times a year to trade furs. The man on her floor, however, was a stranger. He was long and lean, dressed in soaked and mud-caked denim and leather. His face, pale as bone beneath a dark stubble, was contorted in pain. A dark, ugly stain was spreading across his left side, turning the blue of his shirt to a near black. "Found him a mile down the trail." Jebediah grunted, his breath coming in ragged clouds. "Horse was dead. Looked like an ambush. He's got a bullet in him, ma'am. I ain't got the stomach or the skill for it. The doc's out at the Miller homestead, delivering their new baby. Won't be back till morning if this storm lets him. I figured, you being a teacher, you're smart. You'd know what to do." Rosa's mind raced. She was smart, yes. She knew literature and arithmetic, geography and history. She knew nothing of gunshot wounds. The sight of the blood made her stomach churn, but the profound vulnerability in the stranger's unconscious form overrode her fear. He was just a man hurt and alone. Her instincts, the very ones that defined her as a caretaker and educator, screamed at her to act. "Bring him to the fire, Jebediah." she commanded, her voice finding a surprising strength. "Quickly!" Together they maneuvered the heavy, limp body closer to the stove. Rosa lit 2 more lanterns, bathing the small room in a stark, flickering light. She knelt beside the man, her hands hesitating for only a moment before she took a deep breath and began to unbutton his soaked shirt. The material was cold and sticky. As she pulled the fabric away, the wound was revealed raw and terrifying. The bullet had entered his side just above the hip, leaving a ragged, bleeding hole. "Oh, heavens," she whispered. "I'll fetch the sheriff," Jebediah said, already backing toward the door. "Sheriff Thompson will want to know about this." "There's no time," Rosa said, looking up at him, her eyes wide but determined. "The bleeding. I have to stop it. Go to the mercantile. Wake up Mr. Abernathy. Tell him I need whiskey for cleaning clean bandages as much as he has, and laudanum. And a needle and strong thread. Tell him Rosa Evans will settle the account. Now hurry." Jebediah, accustomed to taking orders from no one, simply nodded at the authority in her tone and plunged back into the storm. Left alone with the wounded man, Rosa was consumed by a terrifying sense of inadequacy. Yet a deeper resolve began to set in. She had faced down her own demons to get to this place of quiet solitude. She would not be undone by this. She rushed to her small living quarters behind the classroom divider, grabbing a basin soap and her sharpest sewing scissors. When she returned, the man's eyes were open. They were a startling, piercing blue, the color of a winter sky, and they were fixed on her with a mixture of confusion and pain. He tried to speak, but only a low groan escaped his lips. "Lie still," she said, her voice softer now. "You've been shot. I'm going to help you." She began to cut away the blood-stiffened shirt. His skin was cold to the touch. He flinched as her fingers brushed against him, a sharp intake of breath hissing through his teeth. "What's your name?" He managed to rasp the words, costing him a visible effort. "I'm Rosa Evans." She met his gaze, holding it, trying to convey a confidence she did not feel. "You're in the Redemption Gap schoolhouse. You're safe for now." His eyes held hers for a long moment, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Gratitude, suspicion, perhaps both. Then his eyelids fluttered and closed. "Jasper." He breathed the name, a mere whisper on the wind howling outside. Jasper Kane. And as the storm raged, Rosa Evans, the kind-hearted teacher, found herself kneeling on the floor of her sanctuary, her hands covered in the blood of a man named Jasper Kane. A complete stranger whose life now rested entirely in her unprepared hands. The quiet life she had so carefully constructed had just been violently torn apart. Jebediah returned a ghost of snow and fury with the requested supplies. Mr. Abernathy, the mercantile owner, had thankfully not argued. In a town this small, a crisis for one was a crisis for all, and Rosa's word was as good as gold. With the whiskey to sterilize her hands and his wound, and laudanum to dull the agony, Rosa set to work. The next hour was a grisly waking nightmare. She had never seen so much blood, never been so intimately acquainted with human suffering. Probing for the bullet with trembling fingers, she followed the path of torn muscle and tissue, her stomach roiling with every slight movement. Jasper was barely conscious, his breathing shallow, his body slick with a mixture of sweat and the water from his soaked clothes. He groaned, his body arching in a silent scream as she finally located the chunk of lead lodged against a rib. "Hold him down, Jebediah." She gritted out her knuckles white as she gripped a pair of tweezers she had sterilized in the fire. The trapper, his face pale, pressed down on Jasper's shoulders. The man's blue eyes shot open, locking with Rosa's in a moment of pure, unadulterated agony. In that instant, she saw not a stranger, not a potential danger, but simply a soul in torment. With a surge of adrenaline, she dug in and pulled. The bullet came free with a sickening squelch. After that, the stitching was almost a relief. Her sewing had always been precise, a skill honed by mending her students' torn clothes. She worked quickly, her needle dipping and rising, closing the wound with neat, tight stitches that stood in stark contrast to the brutal injury they were sealing. She bandaged him tightly, cleaned her hands until they were raw, and finally sat back on her heels, utterly spent. By the time Sheriff Brody Thompson arrived, the blizzard had become a solid, impenetrable wall of white. Thompson was a man past his prime, with a drooping moustache and a belly that strained the buttons of his coat. He stomped the snow from his boots and looked from Rosa's exhausted, blood-spattered form to the unconscious man by the fire. "Miss Evans," he said, his voice a low rumble of disapproval. "Jebediah told me what happened. You should have waited for me. Bringing a man like this into the schoolhouse, it's not proper. It's not safe." "He would have died in the snow, Sheriff," Rosa retorted, her weariness giving way to a spark of anger. "Or bled to death on my floor. What would you have had me do?" "We don't know who he is," Thompson pressed on, gesturing to Jasper. "An ambush, Jebediah says. Honest men don't get it ambushed. This man is trouble. I can feel it in my bones." He bent down, running a practiced hand over Jasper's pockets, pulling out nothing but a soaked pouch containing a few coins and a worn, folded piece of paper. He carefully unfolded it. It was a letter, the ink badly smeared and illegible. Worthless. "He told me his name," Rosa offered. "Jasper Kane." The sheriff grunted the name, meaning nothing to him. "Well, Jasper Kane, you've put Miss Evans in a terrible position." He straightened up, his gaze sweeping the room. "I can't move him in this storm, and I can't stay. My wife is alone. We'll have to leave him here with you for the night." It wasn't a question. A cold knot of fear tightened in Rosa's stomach, a fear she refused to acknowledge. "I'll be fine, Sheriff." Thompson looked at her, a flicker of grudging respect in his eyes. "You're a good woman, Rosa. Too good, I reckon. Bar the door behind me. And keep that poker close." With the sheriff gone, the schoolhouse felt cavernously large and dangerously quiet, the howl of the wind the only sound. Rosa dragged a spare mattress from her quarters and with immense effort managed to roll Jasper onto it. He was burning with fever, his skin radiating a dry, intense heat. All through that long, terrifying night, she sat by his side, bathing his face with cool water, forcing sips of broth between his cracked lips, and listening to the fevered, nonsensical murmurs that escaped him. Names were whispered: Maria, John, Bartholomew, and broken phrases about a train, a betrayal, and a ledger. They were the disjointed pieces of a puzzle she couldn't begin to solve. The blizzard raged for 2 days. By the time it broke, Redemption Gap was entombed in a pristine, silent blanket of white. Dr. Martin, a kind but perpetually harried man, finally made it to the schoolhouse. He examined Rosa's handiwork with a raised eyebrow. "Well, I'll be," he said, cleaning the wound and applying a fresh dressing. "It's not pretty, Miss Evans, but it's clean and it's closed. You saved his life. The bullet didn't hit anything vital but the infection. That's the danger now." He left her with a tin of strong-smelling salve and strict instructions. "He'll be weak for a long while. He can't be moved for at least a week, maybe more." The news spread through the slowly reawakening town like wildfire. The schoolteacher there, Miss Evans, was harboring a wounded stranger. Tongues started wagging over fences and at the mercantile. "An outlaw," declared Martha Abernathy, the mercantile owner's wife and the town's chief purveyor of gossip. "Mark my words, no good comes from a man who won't show his face in the light of day." "She's too trusting," clucked another woman at the post office. "A woman living alone, it's not right. She's inviting trouble." The whispers followed Rosa when she ventured out for supplies. She felt the stares, the sudden silences when she entered a room. Her reputation, once as spotless as her classroom, was now smudged with suspicion. The parents of her students were the most direct. Mr. Davison, a stern-faced rancher, cornered her outside the church. "Miss Evans, I can't have my boy Thomas in a schoolhouse with a gunslinger convalescing in the next room. It's not safe. School will have to be suspended until that man is gone." One by one, other parents echoed the sentiment. Within a week, Rosa's school was empty. Her life, once filled with the laughter and chatter of children, was now defined by the heavy silence of the sick room. Her only companions were the wounded man, sleeping on her floor, and the growing disapproval of the town she had called home. Jasper, for his part, was lost in the fog of fever and pain. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was to ask for water or to mutter those same cryptic names in his delirium. Rosa found herself studying him in the quiet hours. His face in repose was younger than she first thought. There were lines of hardship around his eyes and mouth, but no cruelty. His hands, though calloused, were long-fingered and surprisingly graceful. He was a canvas of contradictions, and Rosa, against her better judgment, found her curiosity piqued. Who was Jasper Kane? And why did the whispers outside feel so wrong when she looked at the helpless man by her fire? She was a pariah in her own town, all for a man she didn't know. And as the first true days of a long winter set in, she began to wonder if the townsfolk were right, if her act of kindness had been a catastrophic mistake. The first week bled into the second. The emptiness of the schoolhouse became a character in itself, its silence a constant reminder of Rosa's new isolation. Her daily rhythm, once dictated by lesson plans and the ringing of the school bell, was now governed by the needs of her patient. She changed his bandages, cooked him nourishing broths, and read aloud in the evenings, not from school primers, but from her own worn copy of Great Expectations, hoping the steady cadence of her voice might be a comfort. Slowly, the fever broke. One morning, Rosa awoke to find Jasper's blue eyes clear and lucid, watching her as she stoked the fire. The intensity of his gaze was startling, and she felt a blush creep up her neck. "Morning, Miss Evans," he said, his voice raspy but steady. "Good morning, Mr. Kane," she replied, trying to keep her tone formal. "You're looking much better." "I feel like I've been kicked by a mule and run over by a freight train," he admitted, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines of pain. "I reckon I owe you my life." "You owe me nothing," she said quickly, busying herself with the coffee pot. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," he said, his voice firm. "They wouldn't have. I heard the sheriff. I heard the doctor. You took a risk on me." An uncomfortable silence fell between them. The risk was now her reality, an empty school, suspicious glares, a lonely existence. As Jasper regained his strength, a tentative routine formed. He was a quiet man, observant and thoughtful. He would watch her as she went about her chores, his expression unreadable. To fill the silence, they began to talk. It started with simple things: the weather, the quality of her coffee stories about her students. Rosa found herself speaking of her dreams for the school, Her love of teaching, the simple joy she found in a child's sudden understanding. She learned in fragments a little about him. He spoke of growing up on a small ranch in East Texas, of his love for horses, of a younger sister named Maria, who had died of consumption years ago. He spoke with a quiet, aching sadness that made Rosa's heart ache in sympathy. But his life between the ranch and his arrival on her doorstep remained a carefully guarded blank. He was a skilled storyteller when he chose to be, but his own narrative was full of edits and omissions. "What brought you to Montana, Mr. Kane?" she asked one evening as she mended one of her dresses under the lamplight. He was sitting up propped against the wall, whittling a piece of scrap wood with a pocket knife Jebediah had left behind. The knife moved with a practiced hypnotic grace in his hands. He paused, his eyes on the sliver of wood. "A job," he said vaguely. "Guarding a payroll shipment on the Northern Pacific Line." "Is that how you were shot?" she pressed gently. "Was it a robbery?" He looked up, and his eyes were suddenly guarded, the open friendliness gone, replaced by a shuttered watchfulness. "Something like that," he said. His tone clipped. The message was clear. "Do not ask more." Rosa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft from the window. The fevered whispers she'd overheard, John, Bartholomew, the ledger, came back to her. He was hiding something significant. The town's suspicions, which she had so readily dismissed, pricked at her once more. Her unease was amplified a few days later. With Jasper now able to sit by the fire for a few hours at a time, Rosa decided she had to face the town. She needed supplies, and more than that, she needed to remind people she still existed. Bundled in her heaviest cloak, she walked to the mercantile. The silence that fell when she entered was absolute. Martha Abernathy, who was measuring out flour for another customer, stopped mid-scoop. Rosa held her head high, placed her list on the counter, and refused to be intimidated. As Mr. Abernathy gathered her things, she noticed a new notice tacked to the community board near the door. It was a flyer from the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. Her eyes scanned the bold text. It offered a reward for information, leading to the capture of a gang of train robbers who had struck a Northern Pacific train near Billings 2 months prior. The gang was led by the notorious outlaw, Black Bart Bartholomew. The flyer listed the names of his known associates. Rosa's blood ran cold as her eyes landed on the third name on the list, John Kane. John. The name Jasper had muttered in his fever. Her heart pounded in her chest. She forced herself to remain calm, to pay Mr. Abernathy to offer a polite "good day" to the hostile silence. But as she walked back to the schoolhouse, the snow crunching under her boots, her mind was a whirlwind of fear and doubt. "Guarding a payroll," he'd said. Was he a guard, or was he one of the robbers? Had he been double-crossed by his own partner, this John Kane? That evening, the tentative warmth between them was gone, replaced by a palpable tension. Rosa was quiet, her thoughts churning. Jasper seemed to sense her withdrawal. "Something wrong, Miss Evans?" he asked, his voice low. She couldn't help it. The question burst out of her. "Who is John Kane?" The piece of wood Jasper was whittling fell from his hands and clattered onto the floor. He went utterly still, his face becoming a mask of stone. The friendly, recovering man was gone, and in his place was the dangerous stranger who had collapsed on her floor. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "I saw a Pinkerton flyer at the mercantile," she said, her own voice trembling slightly. "The robbery near Billings. His name was on it. You said his name in your fever. You said Bartholomew and Ledger, too." You told me you were guarding the train, Jasper. Were you lying to me? He stared at her, his blue eyes dark with a storm of emotions she couldn't decipher. He seemed to be waging a war within himself. The silence stretched on thick and heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire. I didn't lie, he finally said, his voice strained. Not entirely. But I didn't tell you the whole truth either. He looked away from her toward the flames, his profile etched in shadow. Because the truth, Rosa. The truth is a dangerous thing. And I've brought that danger right to your door. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Jasper finally met her gaze. His eyes filled with a weariness that seemed to go bone deep. I wasn't a guard, he began, his voice low and raspy. Not an official one, anyway. I was hired by the president of the mining company, a man named Alistair Finch, privately. He suspected his own chief of security, a man named Bartholomew, was planning to rob his own payroll. He hired me to travel with the shipment undercover to gather proof. Rosa listened, her hands clenched in her lap. The ledger, she whispered, remembering his fevered words. Jasper nodded. Bartholomew was clever. He kept a second ledger, a detailed record of his thefts, payoffs, to railroad men, everything. Finch wanted that ledger more than he wanted the gold back. He wanted to ruin Bartholomew publicly. My job was to find it and get it to him. He paused, running a hand over his tired face. John Kane was Bartholomew's right-hand man, a ruthless, violent snake. I managed to get close to some of the crew, acting like a down-on-his-luck drifter, looking for a score. They were planning to hit the train at a place called Eagle's Pass. I found the ledger hidden in a false-bottomed crate in the baggage car. But someone tipped them off that there was a spy in their midst. All hell broke loose. His eyes took on a distant, haunted look. They didn't wait for the pass. They stopped the train in the middle of nowhere. It was a massacre. They killed the real guards, no hesitation. I got the ledger, but John saw me. I knew he'd recognized me from a past life. Before I could make a run for it, he shot me. I managed to get to my horse, but they gave chase. I rode until my horse gave out. The rest, well, the rest you know. He looked at her, his expression raw with vulnerability. I lied, Rosa, because I didn't want you involved. This isn't just a simple robbery. Bartholomew is a powerful man with connections that run deep. John Kane is not a man who leaves loose ends. As long as they think I'm alive and that I might have that ledger, they won't stop looking for me. And anyone helping me is in as much danger as I am. The story was both more complicated and more terrifying than she could have imagined. He wasn't the outlaw she had feared, but his truth was no less dangerous. He was a man caught in the crossfire between powerful, ruthless forces. "Where is the ledger now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I lost it when I was shot." He admitted, his voice laced with self-disgust. "It must have fallen from my saddlebag somewhere out there in the wilderness. It's the only thing that proves my story. Without it, I'm just another drifter with a bullet hole and a tall tale." The fragile trust that had been growing between them began to mend, reinforced now by the shared weight of his secret. Rosa's fear was still present, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce, protective instinct. He had been telling the truth, at least the parts that mattered. He was the victim, not the villain. The town, however, wouldn't see it that way. To them, he was still the nameless, wounded man who had emptied her school and tarnished her name. Her isolation felt more profound than ever, yet she was no longer truly alone. She and Jasper were allies, now bound by a dangerous secret. The harsh Montana winter tightened its grip. The days grew shorter, the nights colder. Inside the warm cocoon of the schoolhouse, an unlikely domesticity took root. Jasper, now able to move around with only a slight limp, insisted on earning his keep. He chopped wood with a steady, powerful rhythm, his strength returning with each swing of the axe. He repaired the broken latch on the schoolhouse door, reinforced a drafty window frame, and proved to be a surprisingly skilled cook, teaching Rosa how to make a hearty sourdough bread from a starter he created from scratch. The emptiness of the room was filled with the quiet sounds of their shared existence, the scrape of a knife on a whittling stick, the soft scratch of her pencil on paper, the low murmur of their conversations. They talked for hours, discovering a shared love for poetry and a mutual disdain for pompous politicians. Rosa spoke of her family back east of a domineering father and a life she had fled in search of independence. Jasper, in turn, opened up more about his past, speaking of a time before the violence, a time of breaking horses and sleeping under the stars, a time of simple freedom he feared he had lost forever. In these quiet moments, Rosa saw the man behind the myth and the danger. She saw his kindness in the way he spoke of his late sister, his integrity in the guilt he carried over the lost ledger, and a deep-seated loneliness that mirrored her own. The formal Mr. Kane and Miss Evans gave way to Jasper and Rosa. The space between them, once measured in feet and suspicion, had shrunk to inches and a comfortable humming silence. But the world outside the schoolhouse had not forgotten them. One afternoon, a stranger rode into Redemption Gap. He was a tall, gaunt man, dressed in a long black duster, even in the biting cold. His horse was a magnificent black beast that seemed as menacing as its rider. The man didn't head for the saloon or the mercantile. He went straight to Sheriff Thompson's office. From her window, Rosa watched the two men talk. The stranger gestured with his head toward the schoolhouse. Sheriff Thompson, looking uncomfortable, shook his head. The man in the duster seemed to insist, his posture aggressive. Jasper came to stand beside her, his body instantly tense. "Who is that?" he asked, his voice low. Rosa's heart began to hammer against her ribs. She didn't need to be told. She knew. The man's face was sallow and sharp-featured, with cold, dead eyes that seemed to absorb the light around them. He was the physical embodiment of the name she had seen on the Pinkerton flyer. "I think," she said, her voice trembling. "That's John Kane." The man turned his head, then his gaze sweeping over the town and settling with an unnerving precision directly on the schoolhouse window. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He had found them. The shadow they had been hiding from had just fallen over Redemption Gap, and the fragile peace of their sanctuary was about to be shattered. The smile on John Kane's face was not just a smile. It was a promise of violence. He lingered outside the sheriff's office for a long moment, a predator savoring the fear of his cornered prey, before turning on his heel and striding purposefully toward the saloon. The swing doors flapped shut behind him like the jaws of a trap. "He knows I'm here," Jasper said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He stepped back from the window, his entire demeanor changing. The gentle man who whittled and baked bread was gone. In his place stood a man coiled as tight as a rattlesnake, his blue eyes turning to chips of ice. He won't make his move in broad daylight. Not yet. He'll want to gauge the town, see who his friends are, who might get in his way. But he'll come. "What do we do?" Rosa asked, wrapping her arms around herself. The warmth of the stove seemed to have vanished, the room suddenly cold and vulnerable. "You," Jasper said, turning to her, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. "Need to be somewhere else. Go to the Abernethys. Stay with Martha. He's here for me, not you." "No," Rosa said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I won't. This is my home. I am not running." She had run once before from her life back east. She would not run again. "We face him together." The look Jasper gave her was one of profound gratitude and deep regret. "Rosa, you don't know what he's capable of." "I know what you are capable of," she countered. "And I know you're a good man, Jasper Kane. That's all that matters." The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every gust of wind sounded like a footstep. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. They barred the door and shuttered the windows, plunging the schoolhouse into a dim, claustrophobic twilight, lit only by the fire and a single lantern. Jasper found the iron poker Rosa had grabbed on the night of his arrival. He tested its weight, his movements economical and deadly. It was a pathetic weapon against a man with a gun, but it was something. As dusk settled, casting long purple shadows across the snow, Sheriff Thompson appeared at their door. "He's asking questions," the sheriff said without preamble, his face grim. "John Kane. He's a bounty hunter. Says he's been deputized by the Northern Pacific Railroad. He has a warrant for a man named Jasper Kane, a warrant for robbery and murder." "It's a lie," Jasper said calmly from the shadows near the fire. "He says you were part of Bartholomew's gang." Thompson continued, his eyes fixed on Jasper. "Says you double-crossed them and killed 2 guards in the process. He says there's a $500 bounty on your head, dead or alive." The sum was staggering. $500 was more money than most people in Redemption Gap would see in 5 years. It was enough to turn neighbors into enemies, to buy loyalty and silence. "He's the killer sheriff," Jasper said, his voice even. "He and Bartholomew. I was hired to expose them." "Kane has a warrant, son," Thompson said wearily. "I'm just a town sheriff. That's official railroad business. He says you have something that belongs to the railroad." "He's looking for the ledger," Rosa interjected, stepping forward into the light. "Proof of Bartholomew's crimes. Jasper lost it when he was shot." Sheriff Thompson looked from Jasper's resolute face to Rosa's defiant one. He sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of the decision before him. $500 is a lot of money. There are men in this town who would sell their own mother for a fraction of that. Kane is in the saloon, buying drinks and telling his story. By morning, this whole town will be a posse." He paused, rubbing his mustache. "He says he's coming for you at sunrise. He wants to make it official with me there to witness. Says he wants to do it by the book." "He's a liar," Jasper repeated. "He won't wait for sunrise. He'll come when he thinks we're asleep. He wants to kill me and take whatever he thinks I have, not drag me back to stand trial where I might talk." After the sheriff left, a heavy silence descended. The trap was set. They were isolated, outmanned, and outgunned. "Rosa, please." Jasper tried one last time. "Leave. Go out the back. No one will see you in the dark." "And go where Jasper," she replied, her voice steady now. "To listen from a distance while he murders you, to spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have done something. No, my place is here." She went to her small chest of belongings and retrieved a small pearl-handled derringer. It had belonged to her mother, a relic of a more genteel life that Rosa had kept hidden away. She had never fired it, but she had loaded it years ago. "I know how to use it," she said, seeing the shock on his face. "My father insisted." They waited. The hours ticked by, each one a small lifetime. They sat in near darkness listening. Around midnight, a floorboard on the small porch creaked. Jasper was on his feet in an instant, the poker held ready. Rosa's heart hammered so hard she thought it would break through her ribs. She stood behind him, the small derringer, feeling cold and heavy in her trembling hand. There was a soft scratching at the door, then silence. A moment later, a splintering crash echoed from the back of the schoolhouse as the flimsy kitchen window was kicked in. "He's coming through the back," Jasper yelled, shoving Rosa toward the corner of the room. "Stay down." John Kane scrambled through the broken window, a long-barreled Colt in his hand. He was faster than a man his size had any right to be. He saw Jasper and fired the shot, deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet splintered the wall where Jasper's head had been a second before. Jasper lunged not at Kane, but at the heavy oak table in the center of the room. With a guttural roar, he heaved it over, creating a makeshift barricade. Another shot rang out, burying itself in the thick wood of the tabletop. "Nowhere left to run, Kane." Kane snarled, his voice a low hiss. He stalked forward, his eyes gleaming in the firelight. "Give me the ledger, and I might make it quick." From the other side of the table, Jasper's voice was calm and laced with contempt. "The ledger's gone, John. You get nothing." "Liar." Kane shrieked, his kombusha cracking. He fired again wildly. "Bartholomew wants it. He'll pay double the bounty for that book." Suddenly, the front door of the schoolhouse burst open. Sheriff Thompson stood there, a shotgun held at his hip. Behind him were two ranchers, the Davison brothers, armed with rifles. They had not waited for sunrise either. "Drop it, Kane," the sheriff yelled. "This is my town." Kane was caught by surprise. He spun around, his gun coming up to aim at the sheriff. It was the opening Jasper needed. He vaulted over the table poker raised high and brought it down on Kane's gun hand with sickening force. Bones crunched and the Colt clattered to the floor. Kane screamed a sound of pure rage and pain and lunged at Jasper. The two men crashed to the floor, a tangle of limbs and fury. Kane was bigger, but Jasper was faster, fueled by desperation. They rolled and grappled, smashing into furniture. Rosa watched in horror, feeling useless. Then she saw the glint of steel. Kane had pulled a knife from his boot and was trying to plunge it into Jasper's chest. Without thinking, she raised the derringer. Her hand was shaking violently, but she steadied it with her other. She aimed for the center of the dark shape on top of Jasper and fired. The pop of the small gun was nothing compared to the roar of the Colt, but its effect was just as final. John Kane stiffened, a look of utter shock on his sallow face. A small dark hole appeared on his black duster just over his heart. He collapsed onto Jasper, a dead weight. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. It was broken only by the sound of Jasper gasping for breath beneath the body of his enemy. The smell of gunpowder and blood filled the small schoolhouse. Sheriff Thompson and the Davison brothers rushed in their guns, still raised. They stared at the scene, at Jasper struggling out from under Kane's body, at John Kane, his dead eyes staring at the ceiling, and at Rosa, standing pale and trembling, the tiny smoking pistol still held in her hand. She had taken a man's life to save another's. The whispers of the town seemed like a child's game compared to this. This was the true reckoning. The aftermath of the violence was a surreal slow-motion tableau. The Davison brothers. Their faces grim, dragged John Kane's body out onto the porch. Sheriff Thompson, looking older and more tired than Rosa had ever seen him, knelt and picked up the bounty hunter's colt. He handled it gingerly, as if it were cursed. Jasper finally pushed himself to his feet. He had a cut on his forehead, and his knuckles were raw, but he seemed oblivious to his own injuries. His eyes found Rosa's across the room. She was still standing frozen, the small derringer clutched in her hand. He crossed the space between them in 2 long strides and gently took the gun from her fingers, prying them open one by one. Her hand was ice cold. "Rosa," he said, his voice rough with emotion. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a fierce embrace. For a moment she was stiff with shock. Then her body went limp against his, and a storm of shuddering sobs racked her frame. She had crossed a line she never imagined she would approach, and the reality of it was crashing down on her. "It's over," Jasper murmured into her hair. "You saved me. It's over." But it wasn't over. Not really. Sheriff Thompson cleared his throat. "We need to talk," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Both of you." They sat at the overturned table which Jasper had righted. The single lantern cast long dancing shadows, making the familiar room feel alien and menacing. Rosa, wrapped in a blanket Jasper had draped around her, recounted the story he had told her about Alistair Finch, the mining company, the undercover job Black Bart Bartholomew, and the stolen ledger. Jasper filled in the details, his voice low and steady. He spoke of his past as a range detective, a life he'd tried to leave behind, and how Finch had sought him out for his reputation for being discreet and relentless. He described the men Bartholomew had on his payroll, the corruption that went all the way to the regional offices of the Northern Pacific. When he finished, Sheriff Thompson was silent for a long time, stroking his mustache. "It's a hell of a story, son," he said finally, "and without that ledger, that's all it is. A story." "Kane confirmed it," Jasper argued. "You heard him. He said Bartholomew would pay double for the book." "I heard it," Thompson conceded. "The Davison boys heard it. That's something." He looked at Rosa, his expression softening with a pained sympathy. "What you did, Miss Evans, it was self-defense. Jasper's life was in danger. My life was in danger. No jury would convict you. But the fact remains, a man is dead on your porch, and this story about Bartholomew, if it's true, this doesn't end with Kane. Men like that don't just give up." The implication was clear. Jasper was still a wanted man, and now Rosa was inextricably tied to his fate. The quiet, respectable life she had built was shattered beyond repair. News of the shooting spread through Redemption Gap with the morning light. The story, however, was not the one Rosa had feared. The Davison brothers, respected and sober men, had told everyone what they'd witnessed: John Kane's crazed attack, his confession about the ledger, and Rosa's desperate act to save Jasper's life. The tide of public opinion, once so strongly against them, began to turn. Martha Abernathy was one of the first to arrive, her usual gossipy demeanor replaced by one of genuine concern. She brought a basket of fresh bread and a jar of beef stew. Her eyes filled with a new respect when she looked at Rosa. "We were wrong about you, girl," she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "About both of you. To stand up to a man like Kane, that took courage." The town, which had ostracized them, now rallied around them. The story of the lone school teacher and the wronged man she protected against a vicious bounty hunter was a powerful one, a narrative that fit the black and white morality of the frontier. They were no longer outcasts, they were heroes. But this newfound acceptance was a fragile shield. A few days later, a telegraph arrived for Sheriff Thompson from the U.S. Marshal's office in Helena. He brought it to the schoolhouse, his face grim. "It's from Marshal Reed," he said, handing the paper to Jasper. "News travels fast. They're sending a deputy to investigate Kane's death and to take you into custody on the Northern Pacific warrant." The words felt like a death sentence. Jasper would be taken away, handed over to the railroad men, who were likely in Bartholomew's pocket. He would never make it to trial. "He'll be killed before he ever sees a judge," Rosa said, her voice flat with despair. "I know," the sheriff agreed. "The deputy is 2 days out. We don't have much time." That evening, the three of them sat in the quiet schoolhouse, the weight of the impending future pressing down on them. The danger had not passed. It had simply changed its face from a lone bounty hunter to the impersonal, corrupt machinery of the law. "I could run," Jasper said, staring into the fire. "Disappear again. It's what I'm good at." "And spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder?" Rosa asked, her heart aching at the thought. "Alone?" "It's better than being dead," he countered grimly. "There might be another way," Sheriff Thompson said, slowly leaning forward. "That trapper Jebediah Smith, he found you a mile down the old southern trail, you said." Jasper nodded. "That's right. That area, it's all ravines and thickets. If that ledger fell off your horse, it could still be out there. The blizzard would have covered it right up. But the thaw is coming. If you had that ledger, if you had proof, Marshal Reed is a hard man. But he's an honest one. He would listen. It was a desperate, impossible, long shot. The ledger could be anywhere, buried under feet of snow, ruined by the elements. But it was the only hope they had. Jasper looked at Rosa. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear and steady. In them, he saw not fear, but an unwavering belief. The love and trust she had given him, a stranger with a bullet in his side, had become an anchor in the storm of his life. Running was no longer an option, not when it meant leaving her behind. "All right," Jasper said, his voice filled with a new resolve. "Tomorrow at first light, I'm going hunting." He wasn't hunting for game. He was hunting for his future, for their future. The search was an act of faith against impossible odds. Jasper, with Sheriff Thompson and the elder Davison brother, rode out at dawn, heading for the desolate stretch of wilderness where Jebediah had found him. Rosa remained behind, a prisoner of hope and fear. She cleaned the schoolhouse with a feverish intensity, scrubbing away the last physical traces of the violence, but she couldn't erase the memory. Every tick of the clock was a countdown to the deputy marshal's arrival. For 2 days, she existed in a state of suspended animation. The townspeople were kind, stopping by with food and words of encouragement, but their sympathy couldn't pierce the bubble of her anxiety. Her entire future and the life of the man she had come to love was being decided miles away in a snow-covered ravine. She had stopped denying it to herself. In the crucible of fear and shared secrets, a deep and profound love had taken root. She loved Jasper Kane, his quiet strength, his surprising gentleness, the haunted look in his eyes that she longed to erase. She couldn't imagine a life without him, a return to the quiet, lonely existence she had once craved. That solitude now seemed like a prison. On the afternoon of the second day, she saw them returning, 3 riders moving slowly, their shoulders slumped. Her heart sank. From this distance they looked like men returning from a funeral. She steeled herself for the worst, her hand going to the locket at her throat, where she kept a picture of her mother. As they drew closer, she saw that Jasper was carrying something. a leather satchel caked in mud and half frozen. He dismounted before his horse had even come to a full stop and walked toward her, his face grim, but his blue eyes blazing with a triumphant light. It was caught in the roots of a fallen pine not 20 yards from where the horse went down, he said, his voice hoarse with cold and emotion. The snow protected it. He opened the satchel on the schoolhouse porch. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thick leather-bound ledger. Its pages were stiff and warped from the damp, the ink slightly blurred in places, but it was legible. Page after page of meticulous, damning evidence of Black Bart Bartholomew's criminal empire. They had found it. They had found the truth. They barely had time to celebrate. Less than an hour later, a lone rider approached from the north. Deputy Marshal Evans, a man who by a strange twist of fate shared Rosa's last name, was a tall, imposing figure with a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened, his face impassive, as Sheriff Thompson laid out the entire story from Jasper's arrival to the shootout with Kane. He cross-referenced the names in the ledger with the warrant in his hand. Finally, he looked at Jasper, then at Rosa, his sharp eyes missing nothing of the bond between them. "I have a warrant for your arrest, Kane," the deputy said, his voice gravelly. "And I have to follow my orders. You, the ledger, and an official statement from Sheriff Thompson will be coming with me to Helena." Rosa's heart froze. "But," the deputy continued, a flicker of something human in his gaze, "I also have a warrant for the arrest of one Black Bart Bartholomew and a list of his known associates. This ledger makes for compelling evidence. It seems to me you're the most valuable witness the U.S. government has against the most powerful crook in this territory. We'll make sure you're protected." He turned to Rosa. "And as for you, ma'am, from what I hear, the territory owes you a debt of gratitude." The journey to Helena was not one of a prisoner, but of a key witness. Rosa insisted on going with them. She used her savings to buy a train ticket, refusing to be separated from Jasper now. In Helena, Jasper's testimony, backed by the irrefutable proof of the ledger, caused a sensation. Bartholomew's criminal enterprise crumbled. Arrests were made, corrupt officials were exposed, and the Northern Pacific was forced to clean house. Jasper Kane was officially cleared of all charges. The bounty was rescinded, his name vindicated. But he was no longer the same man who had been shot and left for dead. And Rosa was no longer the same woman who had cautiously opened her door to a stranger. They returned to Redemption Gap not in the dead of winter, but in the full bloom of a vibrant Montana spring. The snow had melted, and the valley was awash in green grass and wildflowers. The schoolhouse was waiting, and the children, their parents' fears assuaged, were eager to return. One bright May afternoon, with the entire town in attendance, Rosa Jean Evans stood before the local preacher in the very schoolhouse where she had saved a man's life. She wore a simple white dress, and her hair was down, flowing freely over her shoulders. Beside her stood Jasper Kane, his face clean-shaven, his eyes clear and full of a love so profound it was a tangible thing. He was no longer a man running from his past, and she was no longer a woman hiding from her future. They had faced down outlaws and suspicion, danger and death. They had found in each other a home that was safer and warmer than any building. When the preacher asked for the rings, Jasper slipped a simple hand-carved wooden band onto her finger. It was the color of rich soil, whittled from the same wood he had held on the night their truths had begun to unravel. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. He didn't need to say, "You may kiss the bride." Jasper had already swept her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that sealed their shared past and promised a boundless future. Rosa Evans had taken in an injured cowboy, and by winter's end they had faced down death. But now, as spring bloomed around them, they stood together, ready to face the rest of their lives, sharing one last name, Kane. The story of Rosa and Jasper Kane is a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest risks lead to the greatest rewards, and that love can truly blossom in the harshest of winters. It's a testament to the fact that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act in spite of it. Their tale, forged in secrets and sealed by loyalty, is one of the many true-life dramas that played out across the wild and unpredictable American West. If their incredible journey from strangers to soulmates touched your heart, please take a moment to hit that like button to help us share their story with others. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who loves a tale of romance, danger, and redemption. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next video where we uncover another forgotten story from the pages of history.